My name is Richmond Letterio. I'm presenting on return to play for a professional baseball player after wrist surgery. I was with the Giants organization working with their minor league players. The purpose of this is to introduce the audience to physical therapy in the professional baseball setting because it's so different than working outpatient or anywhere else. Explain exam findings and how they were used to create a plan of care encompassing the total body. Not a huge focus on the wrist. The wrist was the initial injury, but really going into what it took to get him back onto the field and playing. And then, again, the return to play in a high-level sports environment. So this is where we worked. We had a full gym with squat racks, anything you need lifting-wise, training room, lots of tables we needed for as many guys as we saw. Pretty much anything we needed, we had right there available to us. So how it would work basically day-to-day was we see players 5 to 7 times per week. So this is their job. So this isn't we see you 2 to 3 times per week for X amount of weeks. It's you come here and you're treated every single day by the physical therapist. There's no set schedule, so it's not this player comes in and sees us at 11 o'clock for an hour deal. That's his day. He's there for the entire day being treated. We had about 15 rehab players at a time that were dedicated just to the physical therapists. And we treated as a team with the athletic trainers, the strength coaches, and the doctors. The doctors weren't always there, but there's at least a doctor there probably every 4 to 5 days, at least once a week. Probably every at least 2 weeks, one of the team doctors was in our building to check out our players. Anything we needed, if we wanted to order any kind of imaging, he was there to sign the scripts for imaging. Any medication we needed, if we needed anybody to go get injections, the doctor was there and could do the injections right there with the doctor's office inside of our building. Physical therapists worked mainly with the rehab players, but we could work with anybody who came in. And that's important because we kind of did everything for the players, so it was part strength coach and part athletic trainer for them. So my patient that I'm presenting on, 24-year-old from Atlanta, Georgia, bats and throws right-handed, drafted 2011 in the 44th round, so that's a pretty late round pick. As of, I think the next year, they canceled all the rounds after the 40th, so now there's only 40 rounds, so that's how late of a round pick it was. Shortstop, and he has 2 children at home in Atlanta. So his history was he ruptured his right ECU tendon sheath March 6, 2016. Before the season had started last year, while swinging, ECU is big in the swing, mid-swing when you're bringing the hands through. Resulted in a subluxing tendon, which he had surgery for on 24th of March last year. Went to rehab at the minor league facility with my CI at that time until November 16th or 2016. Progressed at that time to being able to hit off of a tee. Went home for the off season, came back and said he felt more limited. He came back around end of December, said he felt more limited in the wrist range of motion and he had more pain going on there. We received a cortisone shot and saw no improvement with the cortisone shot and pain or range of motion. So talked to the doctor. Doctor asked if we want to try another cortisone shot, and we said, let's try do some imaging first, see if there's anything new that's going on in there. With that, we saw a potential mass in the wrist around that area, that tendon sheath. So he had surgery on February 1st of this year to remove that mass. That mass was a fibroma in the tendon sheath. It was about the size of a marble. It was pretty significant. Doctor said it basically looked like that had grown in there. It was acting kind of like a doorstop, really jamming that wrist, preventing his range of motion. So that was a pretty big deal. He said immediately once he got out of there, he felt that wrist was just a lot more free. Still saw him immediately the day after the surgery. Didn't do much at that point. Waited a couple of days, did some of the wound care from the surgical site. A few days later, took off his wrappings that he had. Really, when we get guys post-surgery, the doctors kind of just say, take them. They don't give us protocols. The doctors trust the medical team to really do what they need to do. it's a lot more aggressive than you would see in the outpatient setting. And obviously, you're not usually seeing guys day after surgery if you're an outpatient. So a few days after, we were still being gentle with him, took some active range of motion measurements. Most of his limitation was into extension and ulnar deviation. Otherwise limited, but he also hadn't been able to really use that wrist in a while, so he had a lot of weakness and a lot of pain, swelling still from the surgery. So we had those numbers, and then we also took numbers about a week later was pre-spring training for us. So every guy goes under the same measurements for spring training. So we took them through all those same measurements. We knocked out all the rehab guys ahead of time. So I was lucky because we got to kind of start working with him on some things that we found limited there. We had 180 guys on first spring training. So 2 days of physicals, we were measuring all these range of motion measurements for those 180 guys over 2 days. Just 3 of us were as a 3-man team, so 1 player at a time. So these measurements are things that, according to research, a lot of it done by Mike Reinold and Dr. James Andrews, are for overhead athletes and really kind of help predict potential for injury over the course of a season. You see here the flexion, shoulder flexion, looking on his right side, that's his throwing side, 168. We were kind of looking for 170 as being our cutoff for flagging guys. 8 degrees, he was underneath that, he's flagged there. His internal rotation, we combined those for total motion, external rotation on throwing side from being an overhead athlete. He was fine there. Internal rotation, you want to be within 5 degrees of each other, and then total motion within 20 degrees of each other. Extension, fine. Upper rotation, we want to be 45 degrees. He was 42 degrees on his right. It's not too far off there also. 45 to 55 is the real accepted window of upward rotation, which we measure by from spinal scap, full elevation, and then measure the movement of the inferior angle of the scap. And that's more research by Reinold that he gets those numbers and measurements from. So he was flagged there. Internal rotation, hip, external rotation, fine. And ankle dorsiflexion was also flagged for. And that was measured by foot 6 inches from the wall. And then basically, can you touch your knee to the wall without having that foot come off the ground? Other findings that we found with him early on, generalized weakness throughout for the forearm testing, 30 plus 4 minus, and then with pain moving into that extension and ulnar deviation. Grip strength weaker on the right. I wanted to use a handheld dynamometer. I asked for it, but ours were broken, and our good one had been sent over to the major league side for their spring training testing. So they get all the good stuff, and we had the broken things. So that never found its way back over to us. So I did that kind of testing his grip strength on my hand, weaker on the right, and then observing his scap. He had a history of scap problems, and I saw the upward rotation was flagged for him. Looking at scap, he had some medial winging and some dyskinesis with elevation on that scap. And he was a guy who had been known to have some scapular pain with throwing in the past. So our goals for him will ultimately return to play. Pain-free swinging. Not only has to swing, but he has to make contact with the ball. So absorbing that force of hitting the ball, being able to throw pain-free, being able to feel pain-free. We're really trying to work on not only having that wrist have the range of motion that he needs, but also making sure that because he hadn't played in almost a year, that his scap and his rotator cuff was strong enough to be able to handle getting back into throwing and back into swinging a bat. So that when we set him out to go onto the field, that we're not setting him up for failure, and that he's going to go out there, then have shoulder pain, then have to come back to us to undergo rehab again for his shoulder. So it's not just really looking at the wrist, it's looking at making sure that whole upper quadrant is ready to go out there and play baseball. So our plan for him was some manual stretching, joint mobilizations, and soft tissue work to the forearm, making sure that he's symmetrical bilaterally. He really improved with doing some joint moves, doing both some palmar joint moves to the wrist, carpal moves, some ulnar deviation moves, doing that and then reassessing his range of motion. He said he felt better. He had been having a lot of pain in there, felt like he was jamming beforehand. Strength program, increasing forearm and grip strength, increasing power so that when he goes back out there that he can play professional baseball. You need a lot of power, especially through the legs. The legs kind of help generate a lot of power for throwing and swinging to make sure he's not putting a lot of that force through that upper extremity. And total body strength altogether. Then going through those corrective exercises that I talked about, I'm going to show you in a minute here. And then once we feel that he's ready and that he can do things pain-free gripping, pain-free dry swinging the bat, pain-free plyometrics, then we'll take him through a hitting progression and throwing progression to make sure that he's not trying to do everything at once. We don't just put him out there on the field for the first time and say, time to hit a pitcher. Again, make sure that he's not set up for failure and that he can actually go out there and compete with the rest of the team. His prognosis was good. All these guys, when they come in for rehab, are pretty motivated because baseball is their dream. They've been playing baseball for their entire lives, so they want to get back on there. A lot of times it's more holding them back because while they're in rehab, they kind of go crazy and don't know how to manage themselves if they're not playing baseball. I know I had one guy, a different guy, who had a lat tear, and he said he had not played baseball for more than 11 days since he was 7 years old. He had no idea what to do with himself. It was constantly calming him down in the weight room, having him stop attempting to break things because he would get so frustrated. These guys are all really motivated. He had already previously returned to hitting off the tee after that ECU tendon rupture surgery. So that was the big surgery, making sure that that tendon wasn't going to sublux again. He had already progressed as far as hitting off the tee, so that was a good sign that that surgery was at least behind him, and it was more of that fibroma that had grown that had limited his ability to come back further. He's very eager to get back to the field. I cleared him early on to do some bottom hand work, so he was doing some hitting off the tee bottom hand and also taking fielding drills with that left hand. And then he had also been previously as high as AA Richmond, so he was a guy who had advanced fairly far in the Giants organization. He had played short season, played through both both single A levels, and he had made it up to AA Richmond. So he was a guy who had been at a fairly high level, so prognosis to get back was good with him. Any questions about anything that we've done up to that point?
To clarify how they measured upper rotations and movement of the inferior ankle from dependent to full elevation?
Yes, so from the spinal scap, inferior angle, we have them fully elevate and then measure the extrusion of the angle. It's from one of Reinhold's articles on upper extremity examination that he wrote in his. So, looking at him for return to play criteria. This is from a Cools article, and this is what Cools et al. Had said that was for especially baseball players over at athletes. This is what they gave as return to play criteria to make sure that you're putting them in a position for success and not just clearing them and letting them go before they're really ready to be back on the field. So first, evaluate the health status of the athlete, symptoms and analytical functional tests. So that's really what we do with the first measurements, making sure that we have a baseline for him where he is, and so we can gauge that against where he needs to be. Evaluate participation risk based on sport level and ability to protect the athlete. So looking at him as a baseball player and not as a college baseball player, a high school baseball player, but looking at him as a professional baseball player and our ability to protect the athlete once he's out on the field. So not putting him out there and having him be at risk for a shoulder injury or another additional injury in addition to returning him from that wrist surgery. The important part here is looking at him as a professional baseball player, different as if we were looking at a high school or a college baseball player who had more career left. potentially. This is a guy who was already older, having been in professional baseball for 6 years. There's constantly new guys coming in every year. You really have to look at it as this is his job, and there's guys lining up at the door to replace him that they can easily fill into his spot. Everybody's talented, and if you're playing professional baseball, at a talent level, it's easy to get another guy in there. And then evaluate timing in the season, pressure on the athlete, and the environment. So for us, it was pre-spring training, leading into spring training. Pressure on the athlete was high because this was his job. He wants to be there. And then the environment was the spring training environment. Spring training environment, 200 guys in one building, all of them competing to make a team to get out. Very high stress, when they release, every other week they release where, basically like the teams the guys were on, teams like 1 through 4, and those were the teams that got to leave, got to go to AAA, AA, single A. So guys constantly knew where they were being evaluated at. So it's high pressure. Guys were on the AAA team, now they're listed on the AA roster. They're not very happy. So it can be kind of high tension in the locker room, high tension in the training room, especially if the guy's hurt and he gets moved down from where he thinks he should be. So, like I said, we had 200 guys. All those guys go through that physical, so everybody gets evaluated, flagged, and this is just what he was flagged on, an example of how we can treat those 200 guys. Obviously, we're a limited training staff. We can't treat every day the 50 guys who got tagged for ankle dorsiflexion. So every guy that gets flagged for ankle dorsiflexion, they all have their workout folders for the day. They all get this on the left side of their folder, and this is what they do every single day. Everybody's familiar with these, really. I mean, slant forward, band behind the knee, pulling into a stretch of the plantar flexors, slant forward, band in front of the ankle, doing a mobilization with movement. And then lat corrected, the TRX lat stretch and a reach roll lift where your head's on a foam roller on the ground, you reach out, turn your palm up, and lift up there. And then upward rotation, pec minor stretch on foam roll, scapular wall slides back against the wall, and then T-band field goals facing the wall with the bare band. So looking at him with scapular strength, because it was an issue for him, we were really looking at restoring the flexibility of the surrounding soft tissue and increasing the scapular muscle performance around the scap. And this was really just to help ensure that once he got back to throwing, that scap was in a position to allow him to make all the throws he needs as a shortstop, looking at him at his position. So making those throws from shortstop to first. He wasn't a pitcher having to pitch high velocity, and he wasn't an outfielder having to make long throws, but he was still having to make a lot of throws, and really that scap strength was important for him. So his strength progression, early on, we focused on the wrist isometrics and then moved on to exercises where he wasn't holding weight with his hands, just to give him time for that swung to go down and really help that grip strength, or I guess prevent him from using that grip before he was ready. So we used cuff weights on his wrists, non-weight bearing scap work, and weight vests for a lot of the lower body exercises and some of the upper body exercises. So he wasn't having to actually hold those weights. And we kind of did that based off pain, making sure that he wasn't having pain with gripping, any pain with holding the weights. Progressed from there to strengthening forearms and gripping. So with that, we had a lot of tools with which we could work on forearms. We had dumbbells, we had kettlebells, we had the hammer weights, which is either a baseball bat with a weight on it, or it looks like a golf club with a weight on it. We had a gripping machine, and then we had the rice buckets. Use all those, and early on he also used putty just to initially start getting used to gripping again. Also began two-handed plyos a week before spring training, progressing to one-handed plyos a week later, and that was using a plyo progression that is from a Kevin Wilkes article. So manual and plyometric strengthening with him. Once he began his throwing sessions, we did the manuals, as they call them. that a lot of the pitchers do after their throw. So what that is a combination of rhythmic staves and some manual resistance, rotator cuff strengthening. So he did those after every other, I think, throwing session. Rhythmic stabilization drills, I started with him before he started throwing. So that was, especially as he was kind of getting to some of those new ranges of motion, we were making sure that he had that dynamic stability at all the positions he needs throughout his throw, starting from top back phase to release, doing stabilizations in those ranges. Two-handed progression to one-hand progression. Two-handed progression is chest pass into a trampoline, overhead pass into trampoline, then each side. And then the one-handed progression is external rotation, internal rotation, 90-90, and then actually a throwing motion into the trampoline. We also did prone and deceleration ball flips. Prone ball flips being lying in prone position, and you're letting go and catching the ball repeatedly in a quick motion. And then deceleration ball flips is, as you see this guy here, he's in that kneeling position. Hand is up. I'm standing behind him. I throw the ball over his head. He catches it at his peak, brings it down, slow eccentrics, and then throws it back to me. That's another one, just working on that eccentric strength throwing motion. So this is a sample of a daily program for him. So we saw him 5 to 7 times a week. So every day he's coming in. Every day he would have voice heat. A lot of times they liked it, especially before we did soft tissue work. Did mobilizations. Then he would go into his workout for the day. For example, this one was before we were doing a lot of stuff with him holding things in his hand. Lower body, doing these weighted vests, slide boards, TRX, so he didn't have to use his hands, and doing the leg press. A lot of core without doing things involving the hands again. Scap work, and then daily conditioning. The scap work was part of most guys' programs that they used. That another kind of baseball research thing that for guys, especially returning to throw, they did a scap workout once a week and 2 rotator cuff workouts once a week. Pretty widespread across baseball. A lot of band work there, and then some rhythmic staves through there, and some weight work. Another one, upper body workout, do his forearm work, rotator cuff 2. So this is what his kind of day would look like. And then after this, we would work in throwing or hitting through here. So usually he'd go out, do his hitting work, come in, do these workouts, or once he got progressed to being able to go out on the field with the team, we'd go do his field work with the team. And then once they advanced to a point where he wasn't part of that, so if they were going to do their infield, outfield drills, he would come in and do his workouts with us. So this here is probably the biggest thing that I learned and worked on while I was working with him, and this really helped me work with guys later on, was the interval sport program for return to throwing. And this is one that we found from Mike Reinold. Again, he's a big name in baseball research. There's not a lot of guys who do a lot of baseball-specific research. Him and Dr. James Andrews headline a lot of the research. So for positional players, they start throwing at 45 feet, progress on to 180 feet. Ideally, it would take place Monday, Wednesday, Friday over 4 to 6 weeks, using a curl hop method to throw, so not just stand and throw, but kind of get a hop into it to get the lower body working to assist. And they would complete this entire progression before they would go on to position-specific drills. So with him, we had to modify it. I've been training for a while. His wrist was good. We determined that his scapula wasn't having any pain with any of the plyometrics. We were ready for him to start throwing soon, but once Major League Spring Training started, my CI would go over once a week to work with the Major League team. And one day he came back and said he had had a discussion with the head PT over there about a few of our rehab players, and my player was one of them, and they were worried that he was going to get cut in the first cuts before he could actually get a chance to play on the field. So that kind of, me and him sat down and talked about what we could do to give him the best chance to make it with the team. His wrist was feeling good. He wasn't reporting any of the jamming feeling or pain feeling with it. We were doing our gripping exercises. Any of the holding the weights was fine. Hadn't had any problems with some of the shoulder plyos we've been doing. So what we ended up doing was we sat down and said, we can't take him through 4 to 6 weeks, because 4 to 6 weeks would put him at the end of spring training. He'd be stuck in extended spring training, ideally at that point, if not have been cut before then. So we sat down and decided that we were going to have to rush him back, basically, which a lot of times in baseball it's aggressive treatment anyways, because you're trying to get guys back as fast as you can. But obviously, ideally, if this was a college athlete, this is a high school athlete, you wouldn't do this. This is this guy's job. If he didn't have this job, he has no college degree. He has nothing else to fall back on. He has to be on the field. So this is what we came up with. Started 1 and 2 inch plyos. Finished them. Spring training physical started this day here. He had a day off, and the next day, the day before practices started, we started him throwing. We had him come in, start throwing. So ideally, like I said, 4 to 6 weeks, and you're progressing slowly. We progress pretty quickly. Every 2 days, he progressed to a new distance. This was the first day that he said that he felt a little bit of soreness in his shoulder. Told him we're not going to push that then. We're going to hold you out for a day. Got him back into it the next day. Said he was fine. Progressed to 120 feet. And then the next day at 120, we sent him out for an infield-outfield drill. So that was him taking cutoffs. That was him making throws to first base. No problems there. Said he felt great. He was a guy, me and him had a pretty good rapport. He usually was pretty open with me about when he was feeling anything. Through any of the wrist moves and everything, he was very open. Having pain, work with him, do the moves, tell me when the pain stops. He was very open, so we went with him and believed that he had no problems with his progression. And he really never had a problem. He eventually got into a normal practice, had no problems at normal practice, looked good. I went out and watched him. Luckily, I was able to either play catch with him on all these days, or I was able to go out there and watch him play catch with one of the other players that we had in rehab. So I was there. I was able to see his face. I knew when he was throwing, if he was feeling anything. It was easy for me to tell whether he was really in pain or really not in pain. So this was the throwing plan we went through. And then at the same time, so 3-5, we started the hitting progression. That was right around the same time we started throwing progression. Ideally, what we did with most guys was not start both together. You don't want to start them catching and throwing, or catching and hitting at the same time, because if they do start having pain, you don't know if that pain is related to catching or if that pain is related to the hitting. So with him, of course, we had to start hitting sooner than that. So key work 2 days, off 1 day, front toss 2 days, off the next day, cage batting practice 2 days, practice first game. So with this honestly isn't too progressive as compared to what most guys would go to. I stayed with basically the same hitting progression as most guys would go to. The only thing that I changed with this is that it started with the throwing progression as well. This was, again, I was out there in the cage with him, setting the tee for him, watching him, staying right as close to like me and Chad are. I was right there with him the whole time, getting feedback, talking to him. Do you feel anything? Do you feel anything in your wrist when you're coming through? How's that feel? Anywhere with that incision site, scar site. Never had a problem with this. No complaints there. So why do we need to speed up the progression? What it came down to is this year was the last year of his contract with the team. So he had to play to show that he could earn another contract and stick around with the team. He hadn't played in a while due to injury and suspension. He had been injured the year before during spring training and had sat out the entire year. That year prior, he had played most of the year and ended up with a suspension for 50 games and then 100 games later on for substance use. And also in the Giants organization, shortstop was not really a position that they had a lot of need for. They had top shortstops in baseball on top. They just called up their AAA shortstop last week, and he really good top prospect in the Giants organization. They aren't really worried about shortstop. They had a couple guys that are good underneath him, and then our guy was kind of older for his group, and then there are a lot of young guys coming in at shortstop. So his position was kind of expendable, and you already had these hits against him. So that was kind of why we needed to get him out on the field, get him seen by the coaches, and have the coaches get a chance to really evaluate him and know that he's still exists as a player in the organization. So by the end of it, minimal to no risk discomfort. Sometimes with throwing and hitting, you would say it's not painful, but I feel it a little bit. So we still did some joint moves towards the end when he would talk about that. No complaints of shoulder pain. He played in 2 games. Both games he played in, he played well. He had 2 doubles in the first game he played, a double in the second game he played. But on one of his throws, the first, it was a little bit away from the first base, and the first baseman didn't make the effort to pick it off. And so the ball got by him, went back to the dugout. Coach had words with him about being a showboat, trying to make too fancy of a throw for what he could do. So that was Thursday, Friday, I think. Saturday, he was supposed to play in a game, supposed to get more innings in a game. He ended up not making it into the game at all. The coach never put him in. Sunday morning, he came in to see me, tell me how he felt in the morning, went to go to his locker before coming back to me for treatment. And then he comes back with his street clothes when he should have been in his uniform and said, "Good luck on your presentation. I hope your project goes well, but I'm out." I was like, "Oh, what do you, he goes, "I'm done." I was like, "Oh." He was the first guy that day to get cut, so nobody even knew they were doing cuts that day until he came back. So that's kind of a sad moment. He got cut. Another guy who I'd worked with, he wasn't one of the guys I was treating, but he was the guy who I worked with a little bit, who was teaching me Spanish. He got cut too. My Spanish learning got hit that day. So also, that was the day we were supposed to, that was a week we were supposed to retake some of his measurements because he was finally getting back on there. And we were like, let's retake those spring training physical findings and see where you are. So I was going to ask a guy who was on his way out the door, do you want to hang out for an hour and let me check you out again? So that's kind of a limitation to my presentation there. So as far as working here, the pros working with this guy, able to see him every day and watching his environment. It wasn't a 2 to 3 times per week kind of deal. It was I see you every single day. I work with you every day. I go out there with you while you hit. I go out there with you while you throw. I'm there with you while you're doing your workouts every day so I can make the adjustments. So I was making these plans so I could go out there and say, does this bother you? Is this too easy for you? Constantly making adjustments. Cons to it, well, I was out there with him constantly. It's also not an outpatient setting where this is my time with him. So sometimes have him and a couple other players out in the gym where I have to watch all of them at once. It's not a set time, set schedule thing. So it's kind of as the day works out when we get a chance to work with each other. Like I said, there's 15 other guys there that we were probably seeing for rehab at that point. At the end of spring training, which he was there for, that time we had 20 to 23 guys because we had a lot of guys get Tommy John right in the middle of spring training. So that made it even more chaotic. Spring training was 200 guys in the building, my CI, me and another student, and then a team of athletic trainers. Still not enough people for how many people we were seeing and working with. And at any time, a guy can come off the field and say, hey, I was on my way to second base, had to go back to first, dove in, jammed my hand, he checked me out. I mean, that's constantly coming through the door all day, doing quick evals on these guys. So really interesting setting, really interesting working with him and seeing how different it was to work between outpatient and being able to work with as opposed to sports. So references, questions.
Talk about working with athletic trainers a lot, and can you speak to your working relationship with them and sort of the kind of things you did, the kind of things they did, and how do you manage that?
So there's an athletic trainer there for every affiliate. So both A's through short season, AAA, there's an athletic trainer there for each one. And they have a strength coach also for each affiliate. So they're all in there working together. And when they go out to the affiliates, there's not a physical therapist there. So the athletic trainer essentially kind of fills that role out there. So we had to work with them very closely so that they understand the injuries that we're working with, especially guys who go out. We had a pretty good relationship from what I understood with them. I had a good relationship with them. It's very interesting. I'll have guys come in from other organizations and say, we're all really good friends with the other organization, and here it's not that same way. I worked pretty good with athletic trainers. I think my CI did. There was some tension between who was doing whose job at sometimes. There were a couple times where I would eval a player and they would go under the athletic trainer's care instead of mine, and I would have to kind of take that guy back because they weren't doing what they should have been doing with him. But for the most part, a lot of them were really good. The head athletic trainer was really good that we had. He had been in baseball a long time and really knew a lot. But it was an interesting dynamic between who was supposed to be doing whose job.
I know you said you weren't able to do like any remeasures, but did you have like an asterisk sign that you kind of followed throughout progressions?
With him, a lot of it was based on, because his surgery was so far out from that ECU tendon sheath rupture repair, a lot of it was once we removed that fibroma from his wrist, it was making sure that the things that he was doing, that he was pain-free, and making sure that we could send him out to the field pain-free. So a lot of it was based off that we were making sure that when we were doing mobilizations and things or doing his exercises that we weren't creating any pain in that wrist.